Welcome back, everyone. If you're ready to dive into one of history's most impossible, dramatic, and frankly mind-boggling true stories, well, you're in exactly the right place. Today's explainer covers a timeline so absolutely incredible that if someone pitched it as a movie, you'd say, no way, that's way too unrealistic. But it happened. We are talking about the literal birth of a modern nation-state, and it was forged in the fires of war by an illiterate teenager. So, how did a century of brutal, grinding warfare get completely reversed in just 9 days? And not by a battle-hardened veteran general, but by a 17-year-old girl. I mean, seriously, think about that. It's a staggering historical reality. Now, to truly wrap our heads around the sheer magnitude of what Joan of Arc pulled off, we first need to understand just how hopelessly broken her world actually was. A bleeding, fractured map. France in 1428. Okay, let's dive right into this. In the winter of 1428, the unified nation of France? Yeah, it simply did not exist. Decades into the Hundred Years' War, the land was basically this bleeding, fractured map of warring fiefdoms. Fields were ground down to nothing, villages were completely emptied, and the spirit of the people was just utterly broken. And the factions dividing the kingdom created these totally impossible odds. You had the English crown controlling the north and west. That's a massive 40% chunk of the power base right there. Allied with them were the Burgundians over in the east, holding another 40%. And then clinging to this tiny, mere thread of survival down in the south were the Armagnacs. They held maybe 20% of the influence, and they were the ones loyal to the French heir, the Dauphin Charles. They were trapped, they were outnumbered, and completely outmatched. And somehow, it actually gets worse for Charles. Because of the Treaty of Troyes in 1420, his own mother signed away his birthright. She literally declared him illegitimate and named the English king Henry V as the rightful heir to France. Talk about a brutal family betrayal, right? This treaty stripped Charles of his funds, his troops, and his spiritual legitimacy. He was forced to retreat south of the Loire River, trapped in this super melancholy, impoverished court. And he couldn't even get to the traditional coronation city of Reims. The English had laid siege to Orléans, which was the final gateway to the south. If Orléans fell, that was it. France was finished. Whispers in the garden. The unlikely savior. So while kings and seasoned generals are despairing in their fortresses, the true turning point was happening miles away in this tiny, remote border village called Domrémy. It was a place of quiet pastures and thick woods, seemingly a million miles away from the high-stakes political collapse going on just down the road. Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer absurdity of the candidate history selected to save a bleeding nation. Jeanne d'Arc, Joan of Arc, was a 13-year-old illiterate peasant girl. She was highly skilled at spinning wool, sure, but she knew absolutely nothing about riding horses or fighting wars. I mean, think about the worst case of imposter syndrome you've ever felt, and then imagine being asked to save a nation when you don't even have the absolute basics of a formal education or military training. Starting around age 13, Joan began experiencing these brilliant lights and voices in her father's garden. At first, they were comforting, but these voices, which she firmly believed belonged to the Archangel Michael and two early Christian martyrs, soon delivered a staggering, terrifying mandate. Go to France and raise the siege of Orléans. Go to the Dauphin and lead him to Reims to be crowned. Imagine being a teenager who's never left your village and a divine voice tells you to lift a massive military siege. Obviously, she wept. She resisted, completely terrified of this impossible burden. But by 16, she knew she had to answer the call. And her ascent was blindingly fast. In January 1429, her unwavering confidence actually breaks down a super skeptical, battle-hardened garrison commander in Vaucouleurs. Then, to survive the 350-mile journey through heavily hostile territory, she adopts heavy, laced-together male clothing. It was a brilliantly pragmatic move to protect her modesty and shield against the constant threat of assault along the road. By February, she arrives at the fortress of Chinon and instantly picks out the disguised Dauphin Charles from a crowded room. Fast forward to March, and she's surviving a grueling 3-week theological exam in Poitiers administered by elite university professors. And during those exams, she absolutely did not cower. She used this sharp peasant pragmatism. When a Dominican friar with a super thick regional accent asked her what language her divine voices spoke, Joan didn't miss a beat. She just fired back, "A better French than yours." I love that. The scholars ultimately found zero heresy, only genuine faith, and just raw brilliance. Their conclusion? Look, Charles had literally nothing left to lose, so give her an army. The Maid of Orléans, transforming the army. So, finally equipped with custom-tailored white armor and a legendary sword they dug up from behind a church altar, Joan marched toward the starving, besieged city of Orléans. But here's the thing. Before she could fight the English, she had to fight the culture of her own men. The French army was basically a demoralized rabble of mercenaries, famous for swearing and looting. Well, Joan changed that overnight. She banished prostitutes from the military camps. She mandated that all soldiers confess their sins. She absolutely prohibited swearing and plundering. She even forced the famously foul-mouthed veteran captain La Hire to restrict his swearing to just "by my staff." Under this teenage girl, a broken band of mercenaries was transformed into a highly disciplined, zealous holy crusade. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive tactical clash that happened the second she arrived in Orleans. The veteran French commanders? Very cautious, defensive. They wanted to wait for reinforcements and use stealthy routes. Joan was the exact opposite. She was aggressive, highly offensive, and demanded immediate attacks. She wasn't there to just be a quiet little mascot. She was there to fight. This clash of wills totally peaked on May 7th, 1429. During a ferocious assault on an English fort called the Tourelles, Joan was struck deep in the shoulder by a longbow arrow. The English are cheering, right? They think the witch is dead. The French commanders want to retreat, but Joan, bleeding in the moat, refuses these superstitious magic charms. She gets her wound dressed with simple lard and olive oil, retreats to a vineyard to pray for a few minutes, and then, incredibly, stands back up, grabs her white banner, and marches right back to the front line. The English were absolutely terrified. They literally thought she had risen from the dead. Their defense shattered, their commander fell in the river and drowned, and the fortress fell. So, the absolutely crucial point here is the number 9. In just 9 days, a 17-year-old girl completely broke the siege of Orléans. She achieved in 9 days what veteran, seasoned generals had failed to do for over half a year. The myth of English invincibility? Totally destroyed. The road to Reims. Shattering the English myth. Joan knew that momentum was literally everything. With the siege broken, she urged the hesitant King Charles to capitalize on this massive momentum and march immediately deep into enemy territory to the ancient city of Reims for his formal coronation. His advisors said it was way too dangerous, but Joan's solution was just to clear the road herself. And this sets up the rapid-fire Loire campaign, culminating at the Battle of Patay. Imagine this. The English archers are trying to set up their legendary defensive stakes to protect themselves, but then a totally random event alters history. A stray stag runs across the field. The English archers, just out of pure instinct, let out a loud hunting cry. And oops, that noise completely gives away their exact unprepared position. The French heavy cavalry instantly launches a devastating surprise charge. Over 2,000 English soldiers are killed, and that fearsome longbow force which had dominated Europe for a century is essentially wiped out. The road was wide open. Towns literally surrendered peacefully as the royal procession marched on. And on July 17, 1429, Charles VII was officially crowned King of France in Reims. During the ceremony, Joan stood prominently by the altar, holding her white banner. When she was later asked why her banner took precedence over those of high-ranking noblemen, she gave this incredibly powerful answer. It had shared in the pain. It was only right that it should share in the honor. She had actually done the impossible. She gave France its king. The crucible and flame, betrayal and trial. Now let's move to the aftermath, because with the crown finally on his head, King Charles immediately turns to cautious diplomacy. He leaves Joan, who desperately wanted to expel the English entirely, politically isolated. Her incredible momentum was about to be met with devastating betrayal. During a skirmish outside Compiègne, Joan was trapped outside the city gates and captured. And you see that astronomical sum? 10,000 livres. That is what the Burgundians sold her to the English for. And King Charles, the very man she literally just placed on the throne, he did absolutely nothing. No rescue attempt, no ransom, he just abandoned her to her enemies. Now, the English couldn't just execute her as a standard prisoner of war. They needed to brand her a heretic to delegitimize the king she had just crowned. So they put this 19-year-old girl on trial without legal counsel against dozens of elite, hostile scholars. They tried to trap her with this famous theological paradox, asking, "Are you in God's grace?" It's a trap. If she says yes, she claims divine certainty, which was heresy. If she says no, she confesses to damnation. But Joan, with staggering composure, looked right at them and replied, "If I am not, may God put me there. And if I am, may God so keep me." Even her bitterest enemies were just stunned into silence by that answer. But of course, the trial was totally rigged from the start. They actually used her pragmatic refusal to abandon her protective men's clothing, which, remember, she wore in prison specifically to prevent assault by her guards. They used that as the primary excuse to convict her of rebelling against church authority. On May 30, 1431, Joan was tied to a high stake in Rouen and burned to death. She was only 19 years old. She clutched a makeshift cross fashioned out of sticks and called out for Jesus through the flames. It's a devastating, tragic end. An eternal legacy, the birth of a nation. The English thought the fire would extinguish her cause. But wow, they couldn't have been more wrong. They completely failed to extinguish the blazing fire of national identity she had just ignited in the hearts of the French people. Her brief, bright life permanently altered the trajectory of the Western world. The tactical confidence she inspired led to the total expulsion of the English by 1453, ending the 100 Years' War once and for all. Just 3 years later, a retrospective trial completely exonerated her, debunking all the heresy charges and declaring her a martyr. Centuries later, in 1920, she was officially canonized as a Catholic saint. But from a purely historical perspective, her greatest legacy is that she shattered localized feudalism and sparked the transition to the modern nation-state. She proved that a country belongs to its people.
Please like and subscribe.